Tonight, we won't linger in marble halls or listen for poets echoing under arches. Instead, we'll follow a quieter rhythm, one that begins with a single stylus sliding across warm wax. The night air carries a mix of olive oil, rain, and something almost like anticipation. In a small courtyard, a fountain whispers too steadily to be accidental. Somewhere nearby, a lamp smokes, a door sighs open, and two conversations, one spoken, one hidden, begin at the same time. Here, affection isn't loud enough to be confessed. It flickers between columns, trades glances in the reflection of a wine cup, and hides its grammar inside gestures. A fig passed too slowly, a seat chosen too carefully, a silence that lasts just one heartbeat longer than courtesy allows. Rome after dusk is a city rehearsing restraint. Every promise must survive translation between law and laughter, between the tongue and the look that follows it. And yet, even here, love finds its corners, among bookshops and bath steam, at the edge of a dinner couch where shadows do most of the talking. So lower the lights. Let the echo of the fountain become your metronome. And if quiet stories like this one steady your breathing, that's already enough to belong here. And somewhere beyond that quiet, the night turns its ear toward a courtyard. A fountain keeps time more faithfully than any sundial, and the city begins its soft rehearsal for morning. Steps trace the edges of porticos, voices brush past one another like fabric, and the scent of warm stone carries the sound of laughter that doesn't want to be noticed. Here, between the lamplight and the marble, two people might meet without meeting two, their reflections crossing first, their words arriving late. Rome hums beneath them, patient and practiced, a city that's always known how to turn coincidence into choreography. A stylus drifts across warm wax, its rhythm steadier than conversation. Somewhere nearby, a lamp exhales smoke that curls like punctuation. The sound of a fountain slips between the pauses, measuring time by drops instead of words. In Rome, affection doesn't begin with declarations, but with geometry. The distance between two seats, the angle of a cup, the way a glance holds itself steady just long enough to be remembered later. A place at the dinner couch can be both an invitation and a warning. Too near the host and you become spectacle. Too near the door and you vanish with the next breeze. After the last course, the triclinium becomes a quiet game of timing taps, figs, gestures, and silences that last one heartbeat too long. Elsewhere, porches and porticos host their own kind of theater. The air stays mild enough to justify staying, and words about philosophy begin to forget what they were supposed to prove. At the baths, steam softens every edge. Acquaintance, intent, propriety. The fog does what language can't. It blurs without erasing. Even the circus, loud with chariots and dust, learns restraint. Spectators stare at wheels, sand, and sandals with equal devotion, each race a pretext for a smaller, quieter one of glances that cross faster than the horses. In the market queue, patience replaces poetry. You learn character by how long someone waits for the scale to settle, and generosity by how quickly they let you pass ahead. Bookshops offer a slower courtship, still sentences traded like favors. A shared silence wrapped around a question. Have you read this? Meaning, will you stay long enough to find out? On the counter, a small bowl of almonds keeps the conversation polite. Technically unnecessary, socially binding, just like everything else in Rome that mattered. The encounter does not end at the threshold. That's actually where a new character appears. Homes employ a gatekeeper, the Ianitor, literally a person whose job is to be the door. If the door opens quickly, the house is friendly. If the door opens slowly, the house is rich. The Ianitor learns faces, notes sandals by sound, and controls the length of your hope the way a theater mask controls a smile. A good Ianitor can shorten a visit to the exact length of plausible innocence, which is an art. Inside, the household staff function as editors. They remove scenes that might offend the moral censors, also known as ants. A matron adjusts the room's script by moving a stool. A maid pours water. It is mostly water, but also message. We see you. A cousin wanders in to look for a stylus he does not need. The evening is public-private. You say nothing that would embarrass you if repeated by a parrot useful advice in a world with actual parrots. When someone sends a young relative to fetch a shawl, everyone understands the scene break has arrived. The walkway outside functions as intermission. Even a staircase participates. In Rome, going up slowly is an ethical posture. The city is full of soft constraints. They do not forbid. They supervise. They give romance a runtime. Beneath this choreography sits law. And law, as Romans like to remind you, is not a costume. It is the body. The first question is not who you love, but who is allowed to speak for you. Fathers hold patria potestas. Guardians exercise tutela. These are not poetic words, though poets use them like seasoning. A father's nod can condense months of prose into one sentence. Citizenship matters, rank matters, previous marriages, and the number of children matter. Even success at taxation matters, for the empire loves arithmetic the way bakers love warm air. A couple might be happy, but the registry must be satisfied. And the registry is the most patient person in Rome. Those who cannot meet the legal math often arrange a life outside the registry's grammar. Contemporaneum, literally sharing a tent, describes unions recognized by practice rather than ceremony. Many such unions are faithful in public and everything except ink. Meanwhile, others, fully qualified for contract, postpone because timing and dowry are playing chess. You learn that choice exists in Rome, but choice speaks softly and often through family. Under Augustus, private choices acquire public consequences. The city performs morality with the seriousness of a census. Lex Aelia and Papia. Papa-you laws with names that sound like bakery items reward marriage and children and penalize adultery, not as heartbreak, but as civic damage. A mistake in a bedroom can become an event in a courtroom, with witnesses who were, unfortunately for everyone present in the hallway. Reputation is a second currency. It inflates faster than bronze. Some couples hurry to qualify for privileges. Others dissolve quickly to prevent greater legal weather. A person suspected of scandal measures distance in doorways. Even quiet affection has to share a table with policy, which eats slowly. There is a sleepy irony to it. The empire that built aqueducts to overcome gravity is constantly letting social water find the lowest level and then calling it order. And yet people adapt as people do. A mother arranges an introduction that feels like the placement of 3 olives on a plate. Not much, but the plate is now different forever. A freedman calculates his hopes alongside his receipts. The law hums like a background chorus. You can ignore the tune for a while, but you eventually find yourself singing. If the route to a meeting is ruled down, the conversation itself is wittily material. Rome speaks in objects. You might carry a small bottle of perfume, a little undentarium, as portable atmosphere. To leave a room smelling of myrrh is to claim you planned the future 5 minutes ago. A wreath says more than a paragraph. If it is laurel, it praises. If it is myrtle, it suggests. If it is wilted, it says you should have walked faster. Wax tablets clack softly like tiny doors. A quick line scratched in careful Latin can be transported by a slave faster than courage travels on its own feet. Everything is a token, a borrowed scroll with a dog-eared page, a small fig, slightly too ripe, the loan of a seat along a colonnade with a sight line toward a garden where nothing happens on purpose. Even nods at the games have grammar. The circus is a classroom for facial punctuation. Eyebrows perform semicolons. The more valuable the token, the less obvious it must appear. This is Roman minimalism. One might pretend a message is accidental while spending an hour ensuring the accident can occur. It's not that people are insincere, they are ceremoniously cautious. Affection, like a senator, prefers to arrive second after procedure. Around the edges of this exchange stands a professional world that makes the city its euphemisms honest by naming the prices. Meretriss's courtesans negotiate time with exactness that philosophers envy. They know the calendar of gossip, the hours when a certain alley is respectable, the difference between a dinner that ends in a poem and a dinner that ends earlier. Above them in age, or sometimes simply beside them with a notebook, works the Lena, a broker of introductions. She is comic in plays and practical in life. Elena schedules access, calibrates expectation, edits histories, and uses debt like string. Satirists praise her in the language of blame and blame her in the language of praise. Either way, she knows which door to knock. The economy of favors joins the economy of feelings at a very Roman table and pretends not to notice the other guest. It helps to remember the city is built of clients and patrons. A dinner is never just dinner. A stroll is never just steps. A token here, a whispered promise there, and a life can be lived at the speed of a nod. All this eventually requires arithmetic. The engagement, the sponsalia, is an agreement you can count. The math begins with dowry dos whose items read like a household daydream, a chest, silver for 10 places, 2 cushions, a cloak, a small farm that somehow includes a pear tree everyone will remember. Numbers enter the romance as if they were always invited. Families consult friends who have names that resemble adjectives. Serious, useful, firm. The betrothal feels both solemn and refreshingly dull. Dullness is good. Dullness is the sound of stability. A date night, though the phrase would embarrass the Latin language, is usually domestic. Food, recitation, perhaps a brief promenade where shadows on the paving stones do half the talking. Dinner etiquette is more choreography than emotion. A misplaced napkin is a scandal in miniature. The best compliment in this phase is moderation. To leave early is an art form that anticipates middle age. You excuse yourself as if you had remembered a legal obligation, which in a sense you have. Sleep. Brides enter by a door and exit by a door. The Ianator reappears as epilogue, holding the hinge like a line of verse. Public joy is measured, but private relief can be large. The city likes quiet triumphs. Some couples thrive on routine, which ancient households produce in industrial quantities. A lamp to fill, a cloak to air, a ledger to update with a list so unromantic it forms its own kind of tenderness. Guests bring small claims, cakes are involved. Someone's uncle makes a joke about salt. The joke is older than the uncle. Everyone laughs with the correct amplitude. You begin to see why Roman writers are obsessed with thresholds. Every step in or out can be read. The after-dinner walk is short enough to allow a convenient meeting with a neighbor whose timing is suspiciously good. The sky is always described as just after the color of bronze. Of course, Rome also needs an exit line, and it has one, crisp as pottery. 2 is raised to be heavy. What's yours keep? It is divorce boiled down to a receipt. Things begin to move in reverse. The dowry's journey back is itemized with care equal to its arrival. Satchels, keys, even the pear tree, if it was legally portable, are tallied. Friends change seats across the city. People prove that a rearranged dining plan is the most efficient form of social engineering. Inscriptions grow careful. The rumor market accelerates. News that took a week to arrive now takes an afternoon, which tells you more about attention than about speed. Some leave for another street, another patron, another start that looks like chance. Others remain, converting love into politeness, a Roman specialty. What survives, usually, is an object. A name on plaster, a ring in a drawer, a little wax tablet whose scratches have become unreadable but still look like intention. The city is full of these relics of domestic weather, tiny forecasts left behind. As the evening of our observation lowers itself like a careful curtain, the porticos reclaim their ordinary quiet. A fountain interviews itself. Somewhere a parrot rehearses an overheard phrase and doesn't get it quite right. The circus sleeps with its factions like folded banners. You could say Roman dating is elaborate, and it is, but it is also practical the way sandals are practical mini straps. One job. People make room for feeling inside the architecture of rule, and the rules, for their part, soften to accommodate life. There is a kind of civic tenderness in requiring a witness for a kiss and a receipt for a promise. The city is ancient not because its stones are old, but because its habits are comfortable. You can walk from meeting to law to token to farewell and never raise your voice. If you're still awake, you've learned that romance, like a good road, prefers to be paved. If you're not, the lamp is already low, and the wax has cooled, and the door, well practiced, closes itself without a sound. You might not expect a library to rattle, but a chain library does, very softly, like a set of wind chimes that read Latin. The first sound is the key in the door, then iron links greeting the morning with a quiet clink, and somewhere a page turns with the gravity of a curtain. If you're still awake in a few minutes, feel free to subscribe to more whispering facts about locks and indexes, or drift off and subscribe in spirit. I'll assume the best. This is the unhurried life of medieval libraries where the books do not roam, and people, politely tethered by rules, roam instead. The rooms are narrow to protect the walls and wide to accept the sun. Windows are tall because light had to arrive as a thin, obedient visitor. Tables face the light like well-behaved choir boys. On the tables sit lecterns, tilted as if the manuscripts were perpetually about to slide into a nap. Above each manuscript, a chain loops to a horizontal bar, not as a threat, but as a reminder that knowledge is a resident, not a tourist. The chain is carefully measured, long enough for comfortable reading, too short to teach the book to walk. When the custodian raises the shutters, the letters return to life. Parchment brightens by degrees. Ink outcrops rise like tiny reefs. Even the dust performs with restraint, settling exactly where scribes expect to find it again. The library wakes according to daylight arithmetic. No one spoke of opening hours. They spoke of prime, terce, sext, and none, small slices of day that sound like a recipe and behave like one too. Prime is for unlocking and straightening, a ritual that involves more elbows than you'd expect. Chains must be tested. A link that sticks is not an emergency. It is an excuse to bring out the oil, whose smell suggests both devotion and salad. Terse is for scholars who arrive early to advertise their seriousness by the angle of their hat. They nod to each other like metronomes. A new reader is introduced to the table the way a novice is introduced to a new habit. Try it on without questions. The earliest joke of the day is the same every day. Someone whispers that the fastest book in the library is the one with the shortest chain. The custodian smiles in the same place, as if the smile itself were chained to that joke. At sex, the room is warm enough to be briefly unphilosophical. Someone unfolds a small packet of raisins and eats them with the deliberation of a footnote. The chains make a sound like cautious rain whenever a reader shifts. None is the hour for conclusions that are not really conclusions notes that say see also and cf, and thus perhaps, all of which mean I must leave before the refectory runs out of soup. Vespers belongs to closing. The last light is checked against the last line, and if the last line wins, a candle assists but sparingly, because heat is a cousin to warping, and warping is a cousin to regret. A chained library trusts its patrons and does not trust their pockets. This is not rudeness. It is the expression of a long memory. Books have been known to disappear the way good spoons do, quietly and with the best intentions. Station chains, clasps, swivel, a length of links, and an iron ring are a technology of affection. They keep text near the place that loves it most. The chains are not attached to the binding, but to a sturdy hasp on the board, which means the book opens with its tail to the reader and its spine facing away like a cat that has accepted you but not entirely. The order on the shelf is lucid once you learn the trick. The 4 edges point outward, not the spines, so you can read the title written in a brave, blunt hand across the page edges. The shelf is not a backdrop, it is a mechanism. Bars run the length of it, and the chains run along the bars, and the custodians run along everything else. There is a catalog, of course, but it is the sort of catalog that takes pride in being a map of a place that no longer exists quite as described. 3rd bay, north side, 4th chain from the window, and there you discover a hole left by a former manuscript. The absence preserved like a relic, with a note, and used by Brother Martin since February. Brother Martin has been dead for a century. No one removes the note. It is the library's way of telling time by sediment. Borrowing is theoretically impossible and actually negotiable. A wealthy patron can ransom a book with a heavy deposit. A university faculty can exchange a codex for a pledge from an entire town council. A monastery can lend to another monastery the way one garden lends seeds to another, with the understanding that the plants will someday return as stew. Most readers don't borrow, they inhabit. They bring straps to mark their place, clean hands to honor the page, and a small knife called a penknife, which spends most of its day trimming pencils that do not yet exist. Actually, the knife is for scraping away mistakes from parchment or lifting a stubborn leaf. The scraping sound is as soothing as a cat licking its paw, though the result is more permanent. A serious reader wears a ring that looks like a personal moral, keeps a blank notebook of rougher paper, and records excerpts in an angular hand that the future will consider both elegant and slightly exasperated. He will describe the chain graciously. Non-impetitor legger does not hinder reading, though privately he will admit that the chain forces the body to practice good posture. Everyone's back is a moral tale by dusk. Rules are posted, but not the way modern rules shout from laminated signs. Here they are stitched into sermon. Do not moisten your fingers is expressed as a meditation on Noah's flood and the fate of ink when water meddles. Keep knives only for parchment is tied to a parable in which a scholar trims his fingernails too close during Lent and repents. No tallow near bindings is a sentence with the density of a proverb. The rules about marginalia are the most theatrical. Write only what would not embarrass you in front of your confessor. Some readers obey with the precision of saints. Others draw hands with pointing fingers, known as manicules, that are so cheerful they count as decoration. You could follow a single reader through a manuscript by his little hands alone, all gesturing towards sentences about angels or accounting, equally enthusiastic. Erasers are pumice stones. Bookmarks are little tabs of parchment sewn into place like spare ears. Thread remembers arguments long after the speakers forget them. Now and then, a book returns to the shelf wearing a new vellum patch, a square of paler skin on a darker field, as if it had survived a tiny, well-managed storm. Not all readers are human. Moths audition for the role of punctuation. Spiders claim the upper corners and write uncommented commentary. Mice like paste, cats like mice. Many libraries give residence to a cat of good family who understands that the chain zone is not a climbing structure. The cat is paid in food and mentioned in the accounts as mouse hunter, an occupation that the cat lists mentally as sleeping in the warm spot. If you are still awake, this is a good time to notice that medieval budgets are very soothing. Candles, oil, a lock repair, goose quills, binding thread, leather for one strap, barley for the cat, one pair for the custodian on the feast of St. Jerome. The pair appears every year with an exclamation point in the margin, proof that librarians love routine with a little sugar on top. The day's rhythm lingers in the tools. Quills gathered from the left wing of geese curve conveniently for right-handed scribes, a detail that feels like flattery if you are right-handed and an affront if you are not. Ink is a recipe that remembers trees, gallnuts, iron salts, gum arabic, water, patience. The pot is capped with a lid that resembles a small bishop's hat. When you uncap it, the room smells like a legal decision. Scribes talk about the flow of ink as if it were a temperament. This ink is pious. It obeys. This ink is proud. It insists on being seen. Parchment creaks when you bend it, a sound halfway between leather and weather. When a page is turned, tiny shadows move in the hollows of the letters, and for a blink, each letter seems relieved to become itself again. Lines are ruled with the stylus. The impressions are as faint as whisper marks. Some readers trace them with a fingertip they swear is clean. The fingertip is never clean. This is why the rules exist. Midday is the hour of the great compromise. The room warms. The manuscripts make a very small sighing sound like cooled bread. The custodian, who has a name that historians always forget, let's call him Thomas, because the odds are good walks, the aisles aligning the chains so they fall in a uniform droop. A uniform droop shows respect. If a chain is tangled, he lowers his voice and addresses it as friend. A tangle corrected is a moral victory that requires no sermon. Thomas has a ring of keys every bit as ecclesiastical as an abbot's staff. One key opens the freestanding lectern that holds the Bible used for public reading. One opens the casket of illumination pigments. One opens the small cupboard where borrowers' pledges are stored. The pledges are more interesting than the books. A silver clasp from a man who swore he would return the Psalter after a fortnight and no later. A merchant's balance scale from a year when the river froze solid. A woman's brooch shaped like a ship because she had no coin but an abundance of symbolism. Each pledge bears a label. The handwriting improves when the item is beautiful. Afternoons receive visitors with facts that move at walking speed. A physician arrives to consult Galen and leaves with a list of herbs, 2 of which grow behind the stable. A canon searches Gratian for a precedent that would absolve him from weariness, and finds one that absolves him merely from a fee. 2 students argue whether Aristotle should be shelved before Augustine on the grounds that one begins with I and the other begins with O. After an hour, they agree that the alphabet is a flexible servant. A novice in a brand new habit is shown where the sermons live and where the commentaries live and where to sit when he needs a sentence to sit on. The little bell that hangs near the door rings to remind everyone that Vesper is not optional, and the readers react the way readers always react, by writing faster. The maintenance of books is a kind of devotion that looks like upholstery. Bindings are living creatures with squeaky joints. Straps stretch and need shortening. Clasps, those little bronze smiles, sometimes need new teeth. A binder warms leather briefly against a brazier not too close, because heat, again, is a cousin to regret, and persuades it to accept the shape of a board. Glue is cooked in a pot whose smell you can respect without recommending. When a book receives a new spine, the old one is wrapped and tucked into a drawer with a note. The former back of the book on law, repaired in the year of plenty, as if the spine were a retired official. Within the volumes, scribes mend tears with stitches so fine they give you faith in human modesty. A long tear becomes a line of white thread. From a distance, it looks like an extra sentence in the margin, written by a careful spider. Winter lends the library a different accent. Breath smokes, ink sulks. Hands warm themselves on the backs of manuscripts, which appreciate the arrangement no more than a cat appreciates being used as a kettle holder. Some places install a central stove with a flue, which solves the problem of cold by introducing the problem of ash, the librarian's natural enemy. Others make peace with cold by issuing fingerless gloves and energetic suggestions. Chains grow honestly chilly. Readers learn the philosophy of sleeves. In one English library, the windows are fitted with thin slices of horn, translucent and sturdier than glass, which let in a pale, persuasive light like the memory of summer. In Italy, the windows are lavish and the chains are slightly shorter, which is either a coincidence or an architectural joke. Snow on the roof makes the room instantly quieter. If a tile slips and the tiniest trickle intrudes, a junior custodian leaps with a cloth as if performing a miracle. Technically, he is just mitigating humidity, which is what miracles look like in the book world. Spring is inventory season. Every chain is counted, every bar inspected, every title recited aloud in a tone usually reserved for saints' days. A missing link is recorded with a phrase of tender reproach. The catalog receives amendments that read like travel diaries, found not in the third bay but in the second, behind a copy of VelvetHist, wearing dust as a cloak. Healthy otherwise. The library adds a book or two from a donor who prefers anonymity but not invisibility. A donor buys a book because it is good for the soul to tether knowledge so it cannot wander away and get tired. His coat of arms is painted in the book. It looks comfortable there, like a houseguest who already knows where the spoons live. The day ends as softly as it began. Chains are smoothed into their evening positions. Some libraries raise them and hook them higher so the books rest without pressure, as if even iron deserves a nap. The shutters are lowered by degrees to teach the eyes to accept darkness without complaint. Before the door is locked, Thomas walks the room with a broom made from heather and good intentions. He pauses by a manuscript famous for containing a surprisingly funny line about a bishop. He smiles as if he had written it. He did not. He pauses by a pledge that has never been redeemed, a small copper-bound scale. He weighs nothing with it, which is a pleasing approximation of justice. He counts the pear that will be eaten on St. Jerome, decides it can wait, and writes in the daybook a sentence that sums up hours of labor with the emotional temperature of lukewarm tea. No loss discovered. You might suppose that such rooms would feel imprisoning, but they feel the opposite. The chain releases the mind by keeping the book where you left it. Ideas go out, volumes stay in. If you visit tomorrow, the same chain will reach precisely the same distance, and a sentence you underlined with your eyes will still be underlined with your eyes. Readers make pilgrimages not to the book in abstract, but to the copy, this one, with this stain in the corner, this wavering ascender, this anonymous manicule whose finger is more encouraging than most mentors. When the scholars of later centuries removed the chains, they did so for excellent reasons. Books had multiplied, walks had improved, and reading had become a sport of circulation. Yet the rooms that kept their chains politely clinking continue to persuade us that quiet is an infrastructure. The links are not shackles. They are commas in iron, slowing the sentence of the day so it does not run away with itself. If you are still listening, you can picture the morning key turning again, and the manuscripts lifting their pale faces toward the window like old friends in a sunny pew. If you are not, the chains are swaying gently in the draft you made when you left, and the last word you heard has settled into the margin like a small, polite hand pointing toward rest. You might not expect a romance to begin with a glance timed to the turning of a water clock, but ancient Rome enjoyed punctual feelings. The city hummed with rhythms that made meeting people feel like catching a tram, the same hour, the same corner of the same portico, the same procession of sandals counting out the beats. If you're still awake by the time we get to the legal standing of scented hairpins, you can subscribe for more whisper-paced history. But truly, save your energy, because the Romans already did the paperwork. Evening lamps bloom in a dining room, the triclinium, where couches lean like friendly commas around a low table. After the last fig and the second best wine, there is the famous shuffle. Seats are quietly rearranged. No one calls it musical chairs. It is closer to grammatical chairs. Hosts move people the way a careful writer moves clauses near enough to modify, not so near as to confuse. The person you end up next to may be a cousin of a client of a friend, which is an acceptable distance for speculation. The rules of conversation make courtship sound like a long footnote, Praise the hostess as mixing of garum admire. The lamp wicks remark on the firmness of the pears, and never compare the pears to anyone at the table. The laugh that follows is a handshake wearing perfume. Outside the house, meetings multiply. Baths offer steam, marble, and opinions. The public basins gleam like oversized saucers, and conversations float across them with a surface tension of their own. People greet each other with the polite, forgettable warmth of water. How is the grain shipment? How was the theater? How daring is your new haircut? The last question is not trivial. Hair carries messages. A carefully arranged wave might say, fashionable but not expensive, which is the ideal social temperature for disclosure. Bookshops are temples to leaning. Shelves murmur. Wax tablets breathe out a faint scent of bees and decisions. You point to a scroll of love poetry and ask if it's any good. The proprietor answers with a shrug that means good enough to seem well-read, not so good you will be suspected of sincerity. In the porticos, crowds drift like shade that learn to walk. You can share a column with someone and never learn a name, which is part of the charm. Eye contact is a minor sport. There's also the circus, where the seats arranges themselves into stories. Each section hosts its faction. Reds, blues, greens, whites. You sit with your people. You also sit with the people who think they are your people. If your eyes travel farther than a chariot can, they might return with a promise. Later, in the market line, while a seller counts coins with the same fingers he uses to test figs, you count possibilities with yours. The queue is a weak form of fate. Homes come with doorkeepers, and feelings must pass through them. The janitor is not a villain. He is an instrument that plays only one note. Wait. He judges callers the way a librarian judges whispers, by duration and sincerity. He knows which callers carry poems, which carry excuses, which carry charged silences. He can arrange delays like a composer arranges rests, artful, necessary, occasionally long enough to send a message. Inside, matron and maid supervise social geometry. They operate like editors of an anthology, no chapter too long, no preface too bold, no parody without permission. A visit is announced formally, supervised gently, and shortened mercifully. The threshold itself becomes a character in the story, the place of both permission and retreat. The step hears more vows than the couch does. Moments gather there like sandals in a heap, some elegant, some practical, none intended to travel farther without a decision. The boundaries of love and Rome are not drawn with sentiment, but with ink. Laws speak first. Feelings follow, using the margin. At the edge of most conversations sits Patria Potestas, the father's power, as sturdy as a dining bench and only slightly more comfortable. Tutela, guardianship, ensures that women and minors arrive at choices through a corridor of approvals. This is less romantic than poetry and more effective than guesswork. Citizenship, status, and the weight of one's household determine whether affection promotes you, maintains you, or embarrasses you. A match is not only a person, it is property talking to property. Those barred from legal marriage build something parallel and practical under the name contubernium life, together not recognized by the registry, but recognized by neighbors, which is a different, durable kind of authority. In contubernium, errands become vows and shopping lists become joint accounts. The law watches from a formal distance while the kitchen sinks in a little closer. Augustus, who had a talent for rearranging institutions with a face of calm, installs morality like a new calendar. The Lex Iulia and the Papia Papia reward marriage and children as if happiness were a civic festival with assigned seating. Adultery is demoted from private fiasco to public harm. Where love once absented itself through a side door, now it must report to a magistrate. The trial is a peculiar theater. Witnesses, penalties, and reputations that do not heal with ointment. Some unions hurry to meet the thresholds, collecting children the way people collect testimonials. Others dissolve to prevent worse trouble, a legal surgery performed in a tone so dry you could store grain in it. Policy sits with bread on the table and tells dessert to go. People keep eating because dessert is mostly hope, and hope can be saved for later. Language invents a marketplace of feeling with tokens and talk. A small vial of perfume, the ungentarium, leaves a room smelling like a promise kept, even if only the vial kept it. Wreaths say more than paragraphs. Wax tablets carry short lines slick with ambiguity. Slaves and doorkeepers carry them farther than courage can. The messages are compact, like travel garments, and just as prone to wrinkles. People develop a body language that functions as a discrete alphabet. Nod at games to mean, I saw you see me. Gesture in a colonnade to mean, our opinions lean the same way. Loan a book and measure the time it takes to return as if it were a pulse. The safer the token, the clearer the meaning. A favor that could be shown to anyone becomes comprehensible to one. Between street corners and salons stands the Lena, who is not a scandal so much as a supply chain. She negotiates time rather than luck, and her notebooks look suspiciously like schedules. In jokes she is denounced, in court she is discussed. In practice she is consulted. Patrons, courtesans, and time all combine into a kind of arithmetic where evenings add up to rent, and rent multiplies frankness. The compliments are professionally moderate artful cubes of sincerity stacked into towers that resist weather. Rome knows the price of access the way a shop knows the price of oil. It changes, but not for you, not today. Tables in smoky rooms negotiate affections with the gentle exhaustion of diplomats, and everyone leaves believing they have been only practical, which is the most comfortable belief of all. Engagement begins not with roses, but with math. Sponsalia sets terms the way a contract clears its throat. Families compose a short future together out of gifts and hopes measured in coin and in kitchens. The DOS, the dowry, is an argument that proceeds in numbers. Furniture counts as a sentence, linens as clauses, cups as commas. A day together is both a feast and a meeting of auditors. If the match is approved, there is a walk around the garden, where shadows perform the difficult work of saying, "We are alone," while the attendants walk just behind, busy with the very important task of hearing nothing. Courting in Rome is half promenade, half rehearsal dinner. Evenings incorporate high-quality loitering beneath balconies. Someone sings, but not well enough to be dramatic. A verse is scratched into a wall with a stylus in a hand that will be called rustic when it is actually nervous. The best compliment to offer is moderation. Do not shout affection. Place it on a tray. Leave early. You will be thought irresistible. The Ianator returns as epilogue to most romances. The last scene is always a hinge. Doors are part of the cast. Goodbyes at thresholds are optical illusions. They can be as long as you like, but they are still a step. Sometimes the law intrudes again, reminding everyone that a marriage is as much a change of registry as of heart. Names shift their places like carefully stacked amphorae. Property moves from one ledger to another with the stealth of a cat. The day after the wedding, nothing looks different, which is how the city understands that everything is working. People continue to shop for olives, greet barbers by name, complain about the price of cumin, and practice looking surprised by good news. Endings in Rome are precise. Divorce can be a sentence short as a sword to is raised to be happy. Take your things and have your things. The dowry begins its return journey like a caravan. Friends rearrange their seeing charts the way planets adjust orbits. Inscriptions grow careful. Rumors file paperwork faster than clerks. Someone leaves not for a new life, but for another version of the old one. A different patron, a different patroness, a similar table with a better view of the door. The city is tolerant of restarts. It has been rebuilt before. What survives of the affair becomes a shard. the romantic archaeology of daily life, a name on plaster, a ring in a drawer, a line on wax cooling to silence. In the market, you will see a person you once nearly married holding a basket of leeks. You will discuss prices as if that had always been your conversation. It will feel true because Rome treats habit as a sacrament. Morning returns to meetings because Rome enjoys circles. Lamps in a dining room are trimmed again. The couches remember who leaned on them. The janitor tests the door and the door tests everyone else. The laws recline along the edges of the day like solemn banqueters, heavy and attentive. Tokens go out to earn their meaning, and talk comes back carrying all the small, survivable misunderstandings that make a city feel lived in. Someone walks under a portico holding a new scroll they have not yet read, and someone else notices not the scroll but the wrist holding it. A poet rewrites a line about doves, scratches it out, writes sparrows, scratches that out, finally writes birds and calls it restraint. In the baths, someone announces they have discovered a miraculous remedy for heartbreak time, applied in equal doses to both ears. Bookshops sell out of blank wax tablets, not because ideas are multiplying, but because apologies need fresh surfaces. The circus proves again that cheering in unison is the fastest way to tolerate one another. A market line grows, and with it, the amount of looking that can be done without offense. There are small, absurd details that do a great deal of work. Lovers time their glances to fountains because the pulse of water is deniable. A scent of hairpin left on a table announces more than a letter and costs less than postage. A slave's cough becomes a metronome for conversation. 3 coughs permit a change of topic. 4 require one. Walls accumulate scratched messages the way a desk accumulates dents. Some read like drafts of apologies, others like announcements of mutiny. A few, perfectly indecipherable, function as mirrors, letting the reader see what they brought with them. Even legal language occasionally blushes. In a papyrus deed preserved more by chance than by virtue, a scribe writes, "The parties agree to be agreeable." A phrase so honest it feels modern. The city itself acts as accomplice. Rome offers corners that resemble privacy, which is all privacy needs to continue. A baker's doorway produces a reliable curtain of flour. A money changer's stall offers a conversation disguised as arithmetic. Shrines placed at intersections collect both vows and drafts of vows. On certain festival days, the crowds become so generous with their elbows that anyone can be anyone else for a handful of minutes. The calendar makes space for audacity by declaring it piety. Meanwhile, the household gods, the Lares, watch romance pass by with the patient expressions of people who have already seen the ending and know it ascended really an ending. If you find yourself still awake, notice how tidy the Roman repertoire is. Meeting, boundaries, tokens, outcomes, 4 shelves, each with scrolls in reasonable order. The city liked its feelings to be not too heavy for a wreath, not too light for a contract. Perhaps that is why the stories we keep from it are made of small instruments. A door latch, a hairpin, a wax tablet, a good pair of sandals. You could fit an entire courtship into a satchel and still have room for grapes. And when the day closes, as days must, the doorkeeper sets the bar. The lamps receive their lids, the water clock mutters as if rehearsing a poem, and the city dials down to a low, satisfied rumble. The last words of the evening are practical. Tomorrow, at the portico, the second column, the promise is not dramatic. It is simply locational, which is the Roman way to be sure you'll find one another again. If you are drifting, the city will proceed without you, counting time in footfalls and fountains, letting glances commute to their destinations. If you are listening, the wax cools, and the stylus rests like a small, obedient oar beside the tablet, and the night refuses to decide anything at all. The laws keep their posture. The door keeps its hinge. The tokens are quietly asleep in drawers. The market resets its cue. Somewhere, one person adjusts a wreath to say available but not in a hurry, and another person understands perfectly, which is how Rome preferred its meanings, plain enough to live with, faint enough to dream through. You might not expect national finances to whisper through a piece of hazelwood, but England's treasury once did most of its thinking in bark. If you were still awake by the time I reached the correct notch for 1.5 pence, feel free to subscribe or simply let your eyelids do that downward bookkeeping they've been planning. The scene opens at a narrow counter in Westminster, where a clerk rests a smooth stick on felt as if putting a baby down for a nap. The stick is not important until the knife touches it. Then it becomes a sentence. A long notch means a pound. A slightly shorter notch means a shilling. A small mick means a penny. Half a notch means a halfpenny, and there are rumors of quarter-pence that look like hesitations more than marks. Ink is not the point, sound is. The knife scoops a soft, dry syllable from the wood, and the syllable says, ode. When the cutting is done, the clerk splits the stick down the middle, so precisely that the wood decides to be lawful. One half is the stock for the exchequer, the other half is the foil for the pair. Put the two together later, and their unique, jagged marriage line proves the account like teeth prove a key. It is an administrative love story with no romance and no surprises ideal for sleep. Around the counter, time behaves politely. There is a tally basket. There is a tally shelf that does not hurry. The clerk warms his hands over a brazier that doubles as the departmental mood. Sheriffs arrive to settle farms, those large, annual tax farms that smell faintly of sheep even in London. They present a pouch of coins and a face designed to look solvent. The clerk measures not with a ruler, but with memory and the width of his knife. Debts to the crown do not float. They perch like tame birds on bundles of split wood tied with twine. A sheriff receives his foil and tucks it into a wallet the size of a bread slice. If a coin falls in the street, he can look at the matching wood later and remember, without embarrassment, which shilling was supposed to cover which bridge. It is a comforting technology, simple, tactile, mildly immune to damp, and perfectly compatible with pockets, saddlebags, and human error. No password, just a shape that refuses to be forged by hand that didn't split it. Tally sticks also know how to socialize. They circulate in the corridors of credit, unromantic and reliable, like quiet uncles at a wedding. A crown debt can be assigned. A foil travels from a sheriff to a merchant, from a merchant to a wool exporter, from the exporter to a Lombard banker who finds the English habit rustic but profitable. A bundle of notches stands in for a bale of wool, that stands in for a week of wages, that stands in for a roof that does not leak. The stick does not know this. It continues to be wood, politely keeping the conversation measurable. Interest appears sometimes, but shyly, calculated by men who like abaci and window light. An auditor in a fur collar checks stocks against foils like a priest peering gloves. He mutters the number of pounds in a voice suited to bedtime. In the great hall, the exchequer board is laid out with counters for reckoning. That table gives the treasury its name, but the sticks give it its peace. There is, of course, a microculture of knives. The tally knife is not a weapon. It is shaped like an argument you can keep in a drawer. The best knives have a familiar balance, heavy near the thumb, and develop a groove from years of obliging the same angle. Apprentices are taught to cut true because a notch slanted with enthusiasm can be mistaken for generosity. Now and then, a clerk will make a practice stick and cover it with every denomination like a cheat sheet you can stir stew with. The scale is pleasingly fussy. A notch for 1 pound so deep it makes the stick draw breath. A shilling notch proud but not arrogant. A penny nick modest as a coffin church. When tallies represent thousands of pounds, yes, entire loans, multiple sticks are bundled with small parchment tags that behave like adjectives. Third of the fourth bundle of the Easter farm of Devon, says the tag, and handwriting that took a whole winter to learn. In towns, the idea leaks happily. Alehouses keep tabs on slats that lean behind the bar like obedient fence posts. The brewer cuts a notch for each round, then breaks the stick for settlement day. If the halves reunite, the barman smiles because numbers have behaved themselves. Peddlers running long routes trust split twigs more than they trust their brothers-in-law. A midwife records fees on a short, friendly hazel that fits inside her sleeve. A church warden keeps the church roof dry with a pocket of splinters that together equal a page no one will spill tallow on. Even households adopt the method in miniature. A child with a chore stick can show exactly how many pails of water made it from river to pot. The family cat, who has never paid a debt, naps on the bundle anyway. Back at Westminster, our wooden choir hums through the seasons. Sheriffs deliver the grape farms at Michaelmas, and the sticks dig a soft trench through autumn. At Easter, there is more cutting. The brazier complains in February and agrees in April. In summer, the windows are open and the dust from carts settles on the tally shelf like extra decimal places. The exchequer has other paperwork rolls, as long as a polite argument that the tallies keep the atmosphere secular and domestic. They smell of warm cupboard. They tolerate greasy fingers. They accept that auditors will occasionally bite one end like a pipe while doing sums. When accounts are checked, the stock comes from the shelf and meets its foil across the counter like an old married pair who's stopped talking. Years ago, because there was no longer anything to disagree about, their edges fit and no rhetoric can imitate that miracle. People sigh with relief in terms of wood. Here and there, an absurdity surfaces and waves once. A famous fool tries to whittle himself a refund and fails because the split edge refuses counterfeit partners. A sheriff insists a notch was meant to be 2 shillings and receives the exasperated silence reserved for people who argue with furniture. One winter, the sticks are so many that clerks use them as improvised bookends, and the ledgers stand straighter for it. A visiting poet writes a couplet about our nation's forest bank and is advised gently to keep his day job. The tally system is not romantic. It is punctual. Because tallies can stand for promises, they wander into bigger rooms. Kings borrow. Wars prefer coins, but will take notches if that is the path to coins later. Merchants who are not sentimental treat tallies as temporary citizens of their strongboxes. A few experiments occur. Tallies are sometimes bundled and sold at a slight discount to people who like the smell of interest. This feels modern and also damp. Everything in England feels damp. When Parliament says the old hazel method should one day give way to paper, the tallies, being wood, offer no defense. Paper requires ink, geese, and patience. Wood asks only for a knife and the good sense to split lengthwise. Reform creeps in any way, wearing sensible shoes. Clerks practice writing the way a blackbird practices singing in March. They succeed. Tallies keep their old dignity and become, slowly, the office grandparents who remember how things were and do not mind that the tea is stronger now. In the corners of the system, you can see how a technology changes people. The habit of splitting something and sharing the halves trains minds toward reciprocity. A promise is not merely spoken, it is carried. A debt has texture. The word stock, the half kept at the treasury, wanders off to name the rooted wealth of a person. Then their imaginary share is in something that does not even have walls. Foil, the half carried away, becomes the idea of a counterpart that completes an argument. Language pays its taxes in metaphors on time. Meanwhile, clerks develop a wrist memory. They cut notches in bread when they are off duty. They cut notches in the air with their fingers when they explain interest to nephews. When they dream, numbers arrive as quiet grooves. The slow retirement of the sticks is so gentle it could cure insomnia on contact. First, some tallies are copied in ink to keep everyone calm. Then fewer are cut. The basket at the counter looks less like a habit and more like a souvenir. They are not thrown away quickly because nothing that has served for centuries deserves that. They are stacked in bins and corners and cupboards that whistle when someone walks by. A clerk proposes using them as kindling for office fires, which is practically poetry and economically sound. Years pass. Rooms grow tidier. The brazier enjoys an old age of generous fuel. Somewhere an office is warmed by a decade's worth of punctuality. No one writes an ode to this, and that is appropriate. Outside the treasury, tallies survive as household hints. Gardeners use them as row markers. A tailor keeps one as a hem gauge and eventually forgets what it was for. A schoolboy finds a fragment in the dust of a cupboard and makes a flute noise through the split, learning by accident how evidence fits its partner. Antiquaries, who love cabinets more than most people love people, label a few sticks carefully and store them next to coins, seals, shoe buckles, and the past tense. In time, a museum puts a pair of stalks and foils under glass, where they lie reunited and bored. Visitors squint at the notches and think about floorboards. The afterlife of this small technology is mostly linguistic and completely unheroic. Tally up endures as a phrase, cheerful as adding apples. On the books becomes more fashionable than on the shelf, but the quiet gift remains. The idea that trust can be split evenly and carried in two directions until it needs to meet. Modern receipts do the same without sap, but they do not give the hand anything to remember. Even now, if you were to take a fresh strip of wood and cut it honestly and break it honestly and hand me the foil, we would both relax a little. The break would say what our voices might complicate. It would say, in the world's sleepest grammar, I owe, you hold. We match later, a last small picture, and then the lights can dim themselves. Imagine a late afternoon in the old exchequer, when the sun, surprised to find a window it likes, lays a plank of light across the counter. A clerk sorts tallies by county, by due date, by the unhurried alphabet of routine. Somewhere, a brazier ticks. Somewhere, a sheriff pauses at the doorway to count his courage and his coins. The clerk chooses a stick, cuts a careful shilling, and does not hurry through the penny. The sound is a calm argument with the wood, and the wood consents. The split is clean. The halves are equal. The edges, fresh and shy, wait to learn their pockets. No one applauds. They simply fit into the drawer of a nation that could, if necessary, be kept running on kindling and memory. If your eyes have closed, the shelves can finish the story. They have time. The sticks are patient. They have survived rain, reforms, and auditors with cold hands. They are not ambitious. They are satisfied to be exact and wooden. And somewhere in that long, low history of mild arithmetic, someone places a last bundle on a last shelf, ties it with twine, and labels it in a hand that is trying not to flourish. The label is a date. The date is nothing special. It does what dates do. It waits. You might not expect the price of a loaf of bread to breathe like an accordion, but in medieval England, bread was legally encouraged to inhale and exhale. If you're still awake by the time we reach the official spoon used to taste ale, feel free to subscribe in your heart, or simply let your eyelids levy a small nap tax. The day begins slowly at a city bakehouse that keeps the hours of dawn in ovens. A miller has delivered flour that remembers windmills. A baker has tied back sleeves that remember yesterday. And a boy named something like Tom or Jenkin leans on a broom that will never be fully clean. On the wall is a wooden board with chalk lines and last week's good intentions. Next to it, more authoritative than a saint's picture, is the iron weight that decides whether flour becomes comfort or a fine. The baker will make a penny loaf, which is not a fixed size and never has the good sense to remain one. It stretches and shrinks according to the wheat market, like a sweater you wash by mistake. When grain is cheap, the penny loaf becomes generous, as though the law has developed manners. When grain is dear, the same penny admits it must fit inside a pocket. The baker doesn't set the price. Parliament and the market speak quietly through the scales. The oven simply agrees. The assize of bread and ale is less dramatic than it sounds. Assize is not a thunderbolt. It is a list, and a very calm one. It explains, for every price of a quarter of wheat, exactly how heavy a farthing loaf should be, and a halfpenny loaf, and a penny loaf, with a precision that implies someone loved tables perhaps too much. The baker checks a small set of nested weights 2 ounce. 4 ounce ate like a choir of metal siblings who only ever sing the same hymn. He measures water by jug, salt by eye, yeast by stubbornness, and fire by experience. The dough is mixed by arm until it forgets that flour was once powder. Somewhere in the margin of the morning, he pricks loaves with a mark that is both signature and promise. This mark is not art. It is liability. If the loaf is light, the mark will tell on him to the whole street. The neighborhood cat does not care. The neighborhood dog does care, but only for the crumbs that argue with gravity. Officials will visit. They move slowly because authority has a gait. They are called the ale cunner and the bread wearer, sometimes also the searcher, which sounds urgent but usually involves a stroll. The ale cunner has the prestigious duty of testing beer for strength and honesty. In some places he wears leather breeches because one test involves sitting on a small puddle of ale on a wooden bench and waiting to see if he sticks. This is rarely written on resumes. He is also allowed a tasting scoop made of pewter that looks a little like a very serious spoon. He dips, he sips, he nods. The bread wearer brings a hand scale that swings like a sentence thinking of its verb. He buys a loaf publicly, like a small play performed for the market. If the loaf is heavy enough for today's grain price, he praises restraint. If it is light, he announces it in a voice that could comfortably read bedtime stories. Penalties exist, but they prefer dignity. Fines. A nudge to charity, sometimes the spectacle of the pillory, which is less dramatic at noon on market day than it sounds. Given that birds are always on break then, because the system wants to be practical, it allows the baker to erase small sins with something called charitable weight. If the baker overshot the mark yesterday and made loaves a bit plumper than required, he can carry that goodwill forward into today's arithmetic. It is like rolling over phone minutes, if phone minutes were edible. The result is that citizens are protected from being shorted, and bakers are protected from becoming mathematicians against their will. A baker who wants to sleep at night does not flirt with the scale. He keeps a second weight, slightly heavier than necessary, as a moral pillow. He wipes flour from his face the way an accountant might straighten columns. He has learned one important lesson. It is easier to add a crumb than to subtract a complaint. The law travels. In a harbor town, the same assize sheet is read by a reeve, whose boots have learned to avoid puddles without looking. He checks the grain cart wheels for false bottoms with the same finger he uses to count. He ensures that the quarter of wheat is truly a quarter, not a lyrical interpretation. In times of dearth, the sheet becomes sympathetic but firm. Your penny buys you less bread, but it buys you honest less. Housewives accept this with the stoicism of people who have survived winters and neighbors. Children notice only that their crusts have changed shape. The poor are the true audience of the assize, and the system knows it, which is why charitable bread alms loaves are stacked at church doors like a second altar in Yeastot every so often. A small absurdity enters the room and sits down as if it has always belonged. A baker mixes peas or rye into wheat to stretch the dough. And because the law has anticipated even creativity, inspectors bring a simple trick. They crumble a cooled loaf into water and watch which flowers float to the top like gossip. A brewer waters her ale on a Thursday and discovers that the ale cunner owns the kind of spoon that can taste arithmetic. A miller keeps back a mulcher, a fraction of flour, as his fee, and is reminded that fractions are also watched. A village, certain its bread is short, weighs the midwife's cat for calibration, which is not in the statute but works surprisingly well if everyone agrees the cat is a constant. Prices move with the wind. The assize is their patient interpreter. A royal proclamation might announce that a quarter of wheat now costs 6 shillings. The table responds, a farthing loaf must be this many ounces, the penny loaves that many, with a column of figures that looks like a staircase you can eat. Bakers do not memorize the staircase. They pin it with all holes to the wall and glance at it with the same expression used for weather. On market day, a clerk chalks today's target weight on a board hung near the public scale. It is oddly soothing to see numbers made domestic. People line up. Silver changes hands with the soft chuck of old coins that remember kings as hairstyles rather than policies. The baker hands over warm bread, which causes immediate forgiveness of everything that is not warm bread. Ale shares this legal umbrella, and it also carries its own small weather. Grain that would have been bread becomes drink, sometimes because it wanted to, sometimes because the harvest insisted. The assize establishes the price of a gallon in relation to malt costs, and because gallons are arguments disguised as containers, the gallon in one county will disagree slightly with the gallon in another. The ale cunner keeps not only a tasting spoon, but a set of nested measures that resemble a family of shy buckets. He checks the brew with a responsible face, which is not the same as a happy face, and he mediates quietly between a thrifty brewer and a thirsty town. Pure ale is praised. Weak ale is tolerated for breakfast. Sour ale becomes either fine or vinegar, whichever comes first. In many places, the brewer is the brewer because water prefers to be decorative. What is easy to forget with all this careful weighing and sipping is that the system is a kind of heartbeat. It keeps the majority alive in a landscape where a harvest can be a philosophy. Through the assize, grain prices do not roll through streets with spikes. They arrive as small adjustments to loaves people hold in their hands. Bread shrinks like a sigh rather than a shout. In years of plenty, loaves grow with a soft civic pride. The law does not guarantee fullness, but it reduces surprise, and surprise is the enemy of sleep and peace alike. A family planning supper does not need to check the sky. It glances at the chalkboard. The chalkboard is a kind sky. The marks on loaves, those little signatures pressed with a stamp or knife, develop a social life. Shops learn each other's marks the way people learn handwriting. A simple cross means the bakehouse by the east gate. A broad chevron means the one near the bridge. A neat 5-petaled flower means the widow's oven, which always keeps a corner for orphans' crusts. When a waiter finds a light loaf at a stall, he lifts it, squints at the mark, and says the baker's name like a bell rung once. The mark, so small, is how the law remembers who baked what. It also helps people find their favorite bread again. There is a kind of romance in this, but it wears an apron and keeps its hair back. Punishments, when necessary, do not rush. A first light loaf earns a warning that feels like being seen by a schoolmaster. A second might earn a fine that arrives like a quiet bell. A third can invite the pillory, which is less about pain and more about opinion. The baker stands with his hat and hands secured, and passerby offer what the law calls upbraidings and what everyone else calls remarks. Some bring underweight loaves and balance them on his head as commentary. A goose occasionally contributes a honk that is legally admissible. By evening it is over. The baker returns to his oven, chastened, floury, and determined to treat ounces like vows. The town resumes its habit of eating dot inside kitchens. The assize translates into domestic rituals. Housewives pinch loaves and estimate by feel. A mother gives a child the heel of bread as a formal ceremony with no music. Servants cut trenchers flat, firm slices that pretend to be plates, and the leftovers become stuffing the next day. or winter crumbs, or the reason for a friendly hen. A clerk living alone tears his loaf in even quarters because numbers prefer symmetry. On Fridays, the fishmonger's stall becomes ambitious, and bread becomes a ladder from hunger to humility. It is not glamorous. It works. There are, scattered through parish accounts and guild books, tiny notes that explain everything by explaining almost nothing. For weight of the bread, 2D. For new seal of the bakers, 6 off 8D. For viewing ale with the spoon. For 2 stone for the common beam. Item. For carrying light bread about the market to be shown. You read these by firelight, or by the firelight of someone who did not know you would read them. And you see a world that thought about ounces with affection. A baker pays for new irons, which are not weapons but brands to mark the dough. A juror receives a small meal for standing around, which is an ancient legal right and a decent lunch. A reeve repairs the city beam, which is not a metaphor but a literal scale where disputes go to become less interesting. The system survives changes of kings, fashions, and weather because it is made of repeated gestures. Lift the weight, note the price, prick the loaf, dip the spoon, announce the finding, record the fine. If there is a fair, post the board near the maypole. If there is frost, tuck the loaves under cloth and pretend heat is permanent. The assize table grows new columns as money changes, migrating from pounds and shillings to nobles and angels and back, and the bread ignores this politely, continuing to be bread. Bakers join guilds and walk in processions with banners that depict Saint Clement or Saint Honor, saints who specialize in leavening morale. Someone invents a new peel with a handle that does not burn optimism. Someone else writes a verse about our daily weight, which does not scan but means well. When grain is imported, the table nods and widens. When a poor harvest insists on being famous, charity steps forward wearing parish shoes. Bakers are compelled to bake assize bread first before making fancy spice loaves for those who can afford delight. And the town watches with the contentment of people who like to see fairness get an apron dirty. A lord who tries to seize bread for his own household quickly learns the market has a memory and a vocabulary. Meanwhile, in a side alley, a widow proves you can bake justice into dough and sell it for a farthing less if you count your wood carefully. In a monastery, a cellarer measures flour for 120 trenchers as if you were measuring light for Windows. What happens to the system after centuries is not a collapse, but a yawn that lasts decades. Scales become more exact. Coins become less honest and then more honest again. Cities decide they prefer bylaws with tidier handwriting. The assize remains like an old relative at the table, telling the same helpful stories. Bakers, now sometimes called master bakers, keep their marks and their modest pride. The ale cunner, gradually less adhesive, keeps his spoon in a drawer that begins to smell like history. The pillory retires to a museum, where children put their heads through and experience the ancient penalty of being photographed. The moral, if we need a soft one to fall asleep on, is that boring fairness kept many bellies from arguing with the night. Bread as regulation is not exciting. It is not meant to be. It is repetition made kind. It is a table that tells you gently how much a coin can comfort you today. It is a scale that forgives small mistakes if you promise tomorrow with flour on your hands. It is an official spoon that proves even bureaucracy can taste like breakfast. And it is, in every sense, a system that turns economics into something you can hold. Imagine, at the end, a town closing softly. The market packs up with its usual refusal to hurry. The baker's last loaves lean against each other like tired brothers. The chalkboard is wiped with a sleeve and leaves a ghost of numbers that will return in the morning wearing fresh clothes. The alehouse bench is dry or not, but no one is testing it right now. The public beam rests, its pans like quiet moons. A woman tears bread and hands it to a child who has learned to fall asleep mid-chew. Somewhere, an official sets down a small pewter spoon on a windowsill and forgets it there for 30 years. When the wind moves, you can almost hear the assize table turning a page that looks exactly like the last page, which is exactly how it should be. You might not expect a love note to sound like a stylus scratching wax, but in Rome, romance began with that shy little squeak. If you're still awake in a few minutes, you're welcome to subscribe to this gentle ramble in your mind, or simply let it drift by like a fountain's echo in a portico. We will go slow, because Rome is large, and affection there often walked rather than ran. It liked to move under colonnades, where shadows were cooler than intentions, and where you could pass a person twice and pretend not to. Evening comes to a dining room with 3 couches and too many cushions. The triclinium is set like a board game with rules everyone knows and politely ignores. Light oil lamps turn faces into small amphitheaters. The host arranges seating carefully because a chair is a kind of sentence in this city. A lady finds herself placed beside a man who recites Catullus as if it were a new invention. She responds by moving her cup exactly 1 thumb's width closer, which is what passes for an opera here. Across town, a portico keeps the day cool and long, and people practice meeting in ways that look like forgetting to. Bookshops display scrolls with appealing titles and unappealing prices. Browsing counts as literacy and social placement at once. The bags steam like efficient gossip. A nod after a hot plunge somehow reads as, "Let's pretend we said something clever." Festival days provide legal excuses for chants. You can call it religion and still bring a wreath. At the circus, the factions divide a stadium into tribes of color, and lovers learn that loyalty to charioteers is a safe substitute for bravery. You shout for the blues, or for whoever your companion shouts for, which is negotiation disguised as sportsmanship. In the market, queues arrange themselves with a democracy of olives. Coins clink like tiny opinions. A seller counts with easy precision while customers count glances. Someone buys garum and a rumor. Someone else buys a rose and claims to be practical. The city hums with the soft arithmetic of who looked at whom and for how long, and the numbers only occasionally balanced out at home. Roman doors have personalities. An Ionitor, literally the person of Janus, guards the threshold as if it were a minor deity that likes to be consulted. He becomes part bouncer, part editor. He decides which scene makes the final cut. A young man arrives with a perfume flask small enough to pretend it isn't a gift. The Ionitor takes a slow look at his sandals, which tell more truth than speeches, and says the mistress is unavailable until the mosaic floor dries. Matrons and maids practice chaperonage with quiet artistry. They sit at the edge of conversation like commas that belong. They trim time the way a good cook trims fennel, leaving enough to taste, but never enough to cause later debate. Visits are announced with care and ended with more care. A caller is shown out sooner than he hopes, which makes the world plausible. A threshold means more than wood. It is a legal actor. To cross it at the wrong hour is to make a story. To pause upon it is to accept your role as guest, suitor, or a person who will later pretend he simply lost his way. Meanwhile, the city offers neutral zones for practicing the art of almost. Porticos allow miles of just walking. Libraries permit the flirtation of shushing. At a feast, the host's steward notes who requests which wine, because preference is a kind of family tree. You may send a message by cup, by sea, by the business of asking for more bread. Love in Rome speaks in logistics, a couch angle, a companion chosen, a window open to let in cool air, and a rumor dot over all this gentle movement hangs the law with its calm hands. Patria Potestas, the power of a father, sits in the background like an old statue that still watches the door. Feudal guardianship tends to the affairs of women who need a legal signature for certain transactions. This does not prevent them from arranging houses, schedules, and most of the important consequences. Citizenship and rank stand at the gate of possibility. An equestrian glances at a senator's niece and remembers his purse. A freedwoman with impeccable taste buys better tableware than her suitors, and is politely admired for everything except being eligible. The courts quietly keep a record of feelings turned into documents. Those barred from legal marriage soldiers on duty. People of mismatched status construct a life together that has a name, contubernium, which means sharing a roof while the law waits outside like a neighbor who minds his own business loudly. Choice exists, but it dresses in family colors and arrives with timing. When Augustus decides to encourage marriages and births, the Lexi Iulia and the Papia, Papae, he does it with that Roman affection for penalties that sound like calendars. At banquets, jokes begin to include the word bachelor, the way lettuce includes dressing. Adultery becomes a public worry instead of a private sigh. There are now witnesses to behavior that used to belong to poets. Some unions hurry to meet a new standard. Others dissolve before law can arrive with a measuring rod. Reputation crowds the table where dessert should be. You can feel the empire attempting to legislate bedtime, which is almost charming. People adjust by perfecting indirection. A compliment on a tunic becomes a compliment on an entire lineage. A refusal is framed as respect for the holiday. A promise is placed in the future, where promises enjoy a long life. Tokens help when language begins to yawn. A small unguentarium, the tiny glass vial that smells like the idea of a garden, is placed on a threshold as if it wandered there. It means, I was thinking of you, but not conspicuously. Wax tablets carry messages that can be reheated to bring a sentence back from the dead. Servants and doorkeepers carry them with expressions that are legally neutral. Short lines sharpen with the stylus, and because wax remembers pressure, emotions leave a relief map. A nod in a colonnade can substitute for 3 pages of prose. Fingers at games become a dialect. The thumb rests one way for caution and another for conspiratorial courage. A borrowed book is a language, particularly if the lender knows you cannot return it fast. Love is patient, and scrolls are slower than patience. The clearer the token, the safer the meaning for those meant to read it. Somewhere between street corners and small salons stand the meretresses, professionals who negotiate time the way a scribe negotiates margins. They are expert users of signals and calendars. The Lena, the go-between, thrives in this economy of hints. She arranges access with the flexibility of weather and the reliability of a bill. In comedy, she is praised in jokes and blamed in court. In life, she is simply employed. Gifts travel with their own rhetoric. Oysters say, my purse is hopeful. Doves say, I wish to be a poet. And a careful dinner menu says, perhaps we will not be terrible together. Favors are counted by memory, which is very strict. The best compliment remains moderation. In a city that likes spectacles, understatement is applause. And for the record, the first recorded instance of someone being gently scolded for mislabeling a goose at a dinner probably happened within a generation of the first recorded dinner. Asterisk, asterisk. Now we reach the arithmetic of betrothal, where feelings sit at a table and turn into units. Spontalia is the engagement that puts terms in writing and food on plates. Families meet to measure what cannot be measured, so they measure other things. The dos, or dowry, becomes numbers that pretend to be affection scaffolding. A set of silver cups appears, an income from a property is named, a cloak is admired for its practicality. A date night is a dinner that begins with olives and ends with a walk where shadows do part of the talking. The couple keeps their voices low, as if the city had ears, which it does. Fountains in Rome have heard everything and remembered nothing. On the appointed day, The bride's house is busy with good omens that look a lot like logistics. A woolen band is tied here, an offering is placed there, a bed is pointed toward a compass direction that seems sensible. At the door, the Aeneter returns as epilogue and listens to the hinge write the last line. Neighbors lean out their windows with the generous curiosity of people who have already decided to be pleased. The procession moves. The bride carries spindles to suggest that homes are spun rather than built. At the new threshold, fire and water are presented, which are difficult to refuse without appearing to dislike existence. You may kiss in public, but softly, because Rome prefers its ceremonies earnest and its emotions formative. What survives most clearly in notes and ledgers is the list of what moved with her. Garments, jewelry, a modest chest, a less modest opinion of her housekeeping. These will later become important when the law decides to tidy up. Endings are remarkably efficient. A Roman divorce can be a sentence spoken at the right moment to his race to be hapio. I keep your things for you, and the door opens backward. The dowry begins its return journey like a caravan that knows the road. What remains behind are objects that cannot be split without comedy. A set of forks, unequal in number, a bronze mirror that insists on belonging to the better light, a figurine that no one remembers buying. Friends rearrange seats at dinner. Inscriptions become careful. Rumors do paperwork faster than clerks. Some leave for another street, another patron, another start that looks coincidentally like chance. A few exchange keys, which is the most luxurious gesture of all because it means the Aeneter has been charmed into a co-conspirator. What survives of a love is often a shard, a name on plaster, a ring in a drawer, a line on wax that cooled into silence. The city takes it all in with the patience of brick. The law makes space not only for beginnings and endings, but for budgeting affection. A spouse may leave property by will with clauses that sound like polite ultimatums. A guardian signs because paper makes certainty portable. Widows are practical and therefore attractive. Widowers discover that sympathy brings casseroles and inquiries. Guardianship tutela can be waived by women who have learned the grammar of independence. Some obtain the privilege of acting without consent by proving they understand consent better than the people granting it. Courts listen to disputes about dowries with a patience that suggests they have heard worse, which they have. Occasionally, curses on lead tablets appear in drains near the baths, addressed to rivals with a creativity that would impress a playwright. The gods are asked to redirect someone's eyebrows, or their luck, or their shoe straps, and one suspects the gods listen on a delay. Meanwhile, the daily practice of liking someone continues. Lovers pass in front of frescoes that look back without judgment. Street musicians measure the evening into notes that do not demand applause. A lady drops her fan in a calculated accident and discovers that the pavement is chivalrous. A soldier on leave buys a pomegranate because it looks like a plan. A scribe folds a wax tablet into his cloak with the drama of someone hiding a king when it is actually a compliment about sandals. In a garden, two people sit near a fountain and pretend the water is riveting. A poet nearby writes a line about doves and considers suing himself for exaggeration. In a balcony shadow, a maid arranges the encounter by adjusting a curtain, and no one thanks her because gratitude would make her too visible. The city at night is safe enough for strolling if you select your streets carefully and never insult the moon. There is always a price of access, which is not cynical. It is pragmatic. Time is measured in errands completed. Respect is measured in how you greet the stola or the toga garments are introductions with fabric. Gifts know their lanes, perfume vials for suggestion, books for people who read margins first, fresh figs for mornings when conversation needs a hobby. The leanest services cost more during Saturnalia and less on windy days. A small bronze mirror passed hand to hand can mean see yourself as I do, or let us both agree we look well. A lock of hair tied with a thread can be both trophy and treaty. People wear seal rings that stamp beeswax on cord closures. A message tied to a bottle is exactly as romantic as a dependable messenger. There is a sleepy punchline in the fact that many love letters are receipts for borrowed cloaks. The Romans achieve a delicate equilibrium. Affection wears accounts like jewelry, and accounts wear affection like a plausible excuse. The city, having perfected acquaintance, repeats it until it feels like habit. A seat at the theater places you beside the right person precisely often enough to encourage hope, and rarely enough to keep it tidy. Vendors sell nuts and gossip in equal weights. On the Capitoline steps, the view teaches perspective more efficiently than philosophy. All roofs are equal from here, which is comforting. In the Subura, where life runs warmer, people are practical about feelings in courtyards. In the Palatine, where life remembers emperors, people speak in longer sentences. Everyone learns that attention is a coin you can spend only once per minute. You choose carefully. Married life prefers inventory to lyric. There are accounts to reconcile, festivals to attend in the correct sandals, sacrifices to offer with correct fingers. The household gods Lares and Penedes observe, love with a tolerance that suggests they have seen everything and prefer clean hearths. Children arrive with the solemnity of people who are convinced they invented sleeping poorly. Nurses carry them through rooms that will later claim to remember the exact steps. The house functions as a small republic. Votes are tallied by glances and kneels. Arguments travel by corridor and return by evening, softened by bread. If there is wealth, it is managed like a chronic illness, carefully. If there is not, economy becomes an art, a stitch saved here, a wine diluted there, a recipe inherited and improved like a proverb. Humor survives as a domestic animal. Someone makes a joke about losing a sandal at the baths that will be told for 10 years. Someone else invents the phrase, "You always say that," and receives a small laurel for originality. When grief enters, it is tidy. A husband or wife dies, and the household conducts rites with a competence that breaks the heart by not meaning to. Names are inscribed. Portrait busts look on with the serenity of people who have accepted marble as a lifestyle choice. A widow counts the days according to law and then according to appetite. A widower reads and does not read. Friends bring food because food insists the world continues. Then, as Rome does, life folds back into itself. A new meeting under a portico looks a little like the last one. A new letter on wax sounds like a distant cousin. The city never starts over. It simply continues the paragraph. Elsewhere, laughter escapes the theater as if they have discovered a joke about marriage for the first time, which they have again. A poet rhymes heart with market for the challenge. Graffiti on a wall near Pompeii proclaims a love that has already outlived the paint. A sailor writes to someone inland promising stability that moves with the wind. A soldier, posted far away, keeps a wooden tablet with a hand that becomes more his own as he writes. And in those tablets and walls, there survives a vocabulary of wanting that looks very familiar. The wish to see, the wish to be seen. The grand promise expressed in very small logistics. If you are not yet asleep, you might notice how undramatic it all is and how kind that feels. Rome's romance thrives in furniture and thresholds, in the tidy arithmetic of dowries and the impolite sincerity of perfume. It keeps a ledger not because love is a business, but because Rome made everything a ledger and love refused to be the exception. There is law enough to provide rails and loopholes enough to provide anecdotes. There are chaperones who edit and doorkeepers who narrate. And there's always that little stylist scraping calmly through wax, turning whispers into lines that can be warmed and smoothed and written again. Listen, finally, to the city easing into night. A fountain repeats itself like a kind teacher. The circus is only wind moving through benches. Lamps flicker and correct themselves. Somewhere an janitor props the door open with a brick that knows all the stories. Someone sets a tiny glass vial on a windowsill and forgets it there until morning. Somewhere else a wax tablet cools, the message inside it settling into extraordinary ordinariness. The portico breathes out. The sky puts on its simple tunic of stars. And Rome, having arranged another day of meetings, guardians, tokens, and goodbyes, lets the city rest in the steady hum of people liking each other just enough. You might not think that romance could be scheduled between a bath, a breadline, and a chariot race, but in Rome the calendar did most of the flirting. If you're still awake in a few minutes, you can always subscribe to this habit of listening to old details until your pillow files a complaint. Or just let the words drift past like the scent from a seller's tray of warm honeyed nuts. Evening switches on in a triclinium after dinner, where couches sit like commas around the sentence of the table. The host's lamps are trimmed to a flattering caution. Everyone is the color of olive oil and patience. Seats are not accidents. A chair is a message. A cushion is a suggestion with upholstery. Someone is placed near the doorway for quick retreat, which is considered good manners if you are shy, or important, or both. Across the city, porticos collect walkers who have nowhere urgent to be and are satisfied with that. Porticos are Rome's talent for weather control. Shade without walls. Privacy without solitude, the safest place to fail at conversation. Bookshops with proprietors who remember your scrolls and your secrets provide opportunities to turn pages and turn towards someone at the same time. That's invite acquaintanceship by temperature. Cold acquaintances in the frigidarium, warm ones in the tepidarium, and very comfortable confessions in the caldarium where steam edits the adjectives. At the circus, you practice admiration safely by cheering for the same team. Love divided by the greens and blues is still love, and the cheapest way to say, I agree with you, is to stand when they do. On festival days, markets bloom with ribbons and legal excuses. A wreath becomes a portable invitation. Priests bless the possibility of being seen. In the bread queue, practical courtesies do the work of compliments. Someone lets someone else go first and is rewarded with a look that could be translated as, I notice your sandals, and depending on the sandals, that is not a bad decision. Homes have their own casting director. The janitor, named for Janus, is a gatekeeper who pretends to be a hinge but is really a narrator. He decides if a knock is a plot twist or a continuity error. He recognizes the steps of regular callers the way a cook recognizes spice jars by sound. The girl from the house across the alley arrives with a basket and the news that figs are respectable again. Her visit becomes a scene rehearsal where nothing happens very successfully. Matrons and maids operate as editors, cutting lines before mouths can deliver them. They are experts in chaperonage, which is ancient for audience with scissors. They sit at the edge of a conversation and make it better by not letting it be worse. A glance is permitted to last the length of a polite cough. A compliment must be packaged inside something edible or wearable. A threshold is not wood. It is a jurisdiction. Crossing it turns a citizen into a guest and a guest into a story. At the end of a properly supervised visit, the janitor produces that small professional smile, which means the intermission is over. Neighborhoods have neutral territories. The public library is a zone where the only scandal is arguing about where the index belongs. The temple steps face the afternoon and allow long debates about whether it will rain, which is social rather than meteorological. At dinners, a steward moves around the room with the talent of a choreographer, shifting cups and angles so that conversation arrives in manageable servings. Lovers in training learn to speak the dialect of logistics. Perhaps you sit here, perhaps you borrow this cloak. Perhaps you look at the fresco because the fresco is safe to look at. Rome arranges affection, and then the law arrives like a tutelary uncle to ask for receipts. Pater Potestas, the father's authority, waits in the background and clears its throat if anyone forgets. Tutelar guardianship makes sure signatures multiply correctly. Status, rank, and citizenship do not fall in love with each other at the same speed. So families translate feelings into paperwork. Some couples cannot legally marry soldiers on service. Those mismatched by class and invent a proper word for improper permanence. Contubernium. Sharing a roof. It is not quite a marriage, and not at all a secret. And very Raymond in its capacity to name a compromise so carefully that it sounds like a virtue. Choice exists and is sincerely advertised, but timing and family prefer to drive. Augustus, who worries that people are having the wrong kinds of fun in the wrong quantities, produces laws with the confidence of a man arranging other people's furniture. The Lex Aelia and the Papia Papia reward legitimate children and punish certain kinds of enthusiasm. Suddenly, what was once poetry becomes evidence. An adulterer steps from an epigram into court. Do not panic. Rome can make even public shame look like a municipal service. Friends whisper court schedules like weather reports. Some couples hurry to confirm vows before the chalk on the new rules smudges. Others decide that tidy endings are cheaper than messy penalties. Policy takes the dessert seat. Reputations become cutlery. There is charm in the seriousness, like watching a city try to regulate moonlight. Tokens and signals do the heavy lifting because words have somewhere else to be. A tiny engantarium, the glass vial that always smells like the first part of a garden, sits on a windowsill and says more than a paragraph, mostly because it does not say anything at all. Wax tablets make every message reversible, heat, smooth, rewrite, as if communication itself agreed to be merciful. Slaves and doorkeepers carry these tablets with a professionalism that suggests they have read none of them and enjoyed each. A line scratched faintly on wax is the ancient equivalent of a text you might not regret. Public gestures learn to be bilingual. At the theater, a cough can mean I'm present, and a badly timed cough can mean I'm too present. In a colonnade, the direction in which a ring turns while a hand is resting can be a sentence. Borrowed books are legally obligations and romantically a kind of adoption. A scroll rarely returns without acquiring an opinion. The safer the token, the clearer the meaning to those meant to read it. Between street corners and small salons stand the meretresses, the professional negotiators of attention. They manage diaries the way generals manage supply lines, and charge more near the circus on important race days because hope and spectacle share a price index. The Lena, the go-between, runs a communications business with a human face. She is praised in theater and blamed in court, which might be the most Roman resume. Gifts travel with careful grammar. Oysters whisper that the sea has an advertising budget. Doves perform transferable symbolism. Figs agree to be metaphors without argument. A dinner menu says, I have thought about your digestion, which in this city is a declaration. Favors enter accounts. Kindness becomes arithmetic with human variables. The best compliment remains moderation. The second best is quoting a poet without sounding employed by him. If you are still listening, here is a micro trivia to keep your eyelids pleasantly busy. The earliest love note on papyrus we have from Roman Egypt is basically a meeting confirmation proof that even passion appreciates punctuality. By the time betrothal emerges, emotions have been wrapped in parchment until they look like household inventories. Sponsalia, the formal engagement, places terms between families with the tact of a ledger. The dos, or dowry, steps into the room as a sum that means we anticipate a future, which is what money always tries to say when it wants to be poetic. Lists grow, not because love needs them, but because storage does. Bronze vessels, a bed with a new rope lattice, a modest swarm of clothing, a promise of income from a small farm, that sort of practical lyric. There may be a dinner to celebrate, olives that understand their importance, bread that pretends to be simple, a fish that died for diplomacy. Afterward, a walk follows streets that learn to be romantic by carrying aqueduct shadows. People say very little because the stones say it better. On the wedding day, omens circulate like ushers. A woolen belt is tied. An altar receives a sensible portion of flour. Fire and water present themselves at the new threshold like helpful cousins. Neighbors lean from windows with faces lit by honest curiosity. The bride arrives with spindles to announce that a home is woven. The groom makes promises at a volume that can reach the back row. A shouted epigram lands from a friend who thinks he is Catullus. The crowd forgives him in advance. At the door, the Ianitor returns for his cameo, pleased to have handled the casting properly. When marriages end, and many do, they end with Roman precision. A spouse may say a sentence that has the efficiency of a stamp. To his race to be habeo, I keep your things for you, and the legal gears engage. The dowry reverses direction like a caravan with a good map. Some objects resist division on philosophical grounds. A set of cups returning to 2 households becomes a math problem for which there is no honest solution. Friends update seating plans. Neighbors think quietly in hallways. Clerks practice their fastest script. Reputation takes a short walk, returns with news, and removes its sandals. There's pathos in how unfussy it is. Paperwork cares for grief the way geometry cares for triangles, patiently, correctly, and without poetry. Some ex-spouses remarry as if Rome had invented the sequel. Some discover that widowed or divorced life opens a gallery of modest freedom's property, managed without intermediaries. Decisions signed without witnesses, afternoons owned by no one. The city permits this with a shrug. It has empires to think about and is grateful when private lives run on time. What remains of a love is often subatomic. A ring wrapped in a rag at the back of a drawer. A wax tablet with a sentence erased too gently. A bit of wall in Pompeii that says, so and so loves so and proves that durable materials are sentimental. Under everything, the law keeps its arms outstretched like a patient parent. Wills acknowledge affection in clauses that sound like gentle ultimatums. A house to you if you keep the garden. A small farm to you if you remember to visit the shrine. Guardianship tutela can be waived for women who demonstrate competence that outpaces the form, signing them into dependence. Courts arbitrate dowries like referees who prefer ties. Their goal is for everyone to leave with the correct number of amphorae and the will to live. Occasionally, someone slides a lead curse into a fountain drain, asking the underworld to nudge a rival's path toward misplaced sandals, which is the bureaucratic way of requesting heartbreak. The gods, busy and tolerant, probably forward these to a department specializing in shoe-related outcomes. Meanwhile, the rest of the city persists in the soft exercise of liking one another. In a garden, a couple evaluates a statue's proportions as if they were neutrally minded. The statue remains calm. In a balcony's rectangle of shade, a maid adjusts a curtain to transform a near miss into an encounter, and then looks away so that gratitude will not be a problem. A scribe, underpaid and therefore useful, folds a tablet into his cloak with exaggerated discretion. A soldier on leave practices domesticity by buying a pomegranate he cannot open neatly. A poet, unfireable, composes a couplet that rhymes heart with market and hopes no one notices. In the Subura, conversations stand closer. In the Palatine, sentences grow like colonnades. Everywhere, attention spends itself carefully. Rome is good at budgeting glances. It is the ancient version of turning your phone to silent but still keeping it face up. Once married, People discover that affection likes routines. The household gods, Lares and Penates, observe life from their shelf like benevolent auditors. They prefer clean floors and remember offerings more clearly than arguments. There are festivals to greet with the right shoes and sacrifices to conduct with the right knife-holding hand. Details serve as devotion and as memory. Children arrive with the same confidence as small emperors. A wet nurse carries them through rooms that instantly remember the journey. Parents experiment with sleep as if it were a public office. A joke about lost sandals at the baths becomes a family heirloom, repeated through generations until it achieves the status of myth. Wealthy households practice estate management, which is romance with subtraction. Modest households practice invention, which is romance with extra steps. Bread is stretched, wine is negotiated with water, recipes inherit thrift from grandmothers. Love, unsurprisingly, thrives on reliable bowls. When it ends for good by Omis, age or fate, the city knows what to do, because it rehearses everything. Funerals move with formal kindness. Names are inscribed. Portraits in painted wood or carved stone join the family, practicing eternity without fuss. Widows and widowers find that time is both elastic and strict. It heals like Roman cement, slowly and stronger than the original in places. Letters travel, somewhat unsure of their mission, and time passes with the humility of long streets. And then, because cities repeat themselves, a new meeting occurs under a portico. Another library lends a scroll. Another fountain offers its small applause. The conclusion is not a conclusion, but a cycle with patience. If you're drifting now, carry this last trivia into the soft part of sleep. Above everything, Rome believed that a door could be a person. The Ianitor stands for the household, the way a signature stands for the signer. The god Janus looks both ways because beginnings and endings are roommates. Love, there is a procession of thresholds, temple steps, market aisles, bath halls, library benches, dining room couches, the home itself, each crossed quietly and each remembered by rugs more than by poets. The city was grand elsewhere, but in matters of the heart, it preferred minor acts with excellent paperwork. It liked signals you could plausibly deny, laws you could plausibly follow, and gifts small enough to forget until you found them in a drawer on a warm afternoon. Listen a moment longer to the stylus scratching its small path across wax. A fountain answers with its comfortable arithmetic. Distant cheers from the circus turn into weather. Lamps blink and settle like animals preparing to sleep. Somewhere a little glass vial on a ledge has tipped over, and the whole room smells faintly like someone meant well. Somewhere a doorkeeper counts footsteps and decides the night is complete. Rome folds its scroll and places it beside the bed. And you, having crossed a quiet threshold of your own, can let the city's gentle arithmetic continue without you. You might not expect the romantic life of a city famous for conquest to depend on furniture placement and lamp oil, but here we are. Rome, efficient even at feelings, likes to file affection between errands. If you're still awake in a few minutes, feel free to subscribe to this ongoing habit of listening to history until it dissolves into pillow. Or don't. I won't take a census. Evening opens with a thin bright line across a lamp wick, and the triclinium reveals itself like a polite stage. The couches are not thrown about. They are arranged with the precision of a draft map. Hosts calculate sightlines the way engineers calculate arches. You recline on your left elbow because that is civilization, and because it efficiently frees your right hand for olives and opinions. Seat assignments look like chance and behave like plans. A cousin happens to face a newcomer. A reputable widow happens to sit where the lamplight draws her profile like a coin. The conversation is built from small bricks, grain prices, amphora shapes, the serious topic of whether the garum seller near the Subura is adulterating his sauce with too much cheap fish. Between bricks, mortar, questions designed to be answered with glances. Triclinia are the safest place to make mistakes because there are platters to hide behind. A smile can be reasonably aimed at the breadbasket and accidentally strike a person. Everyone pretends bread had it coming down outside. Rome possesses those long shaded porches called porticos, and they are the city's answer to the question, where should we almost meet? They collect weather, footsteps, and the sound of sandals slapping time. People practice their public privacy there, walking at a speed that says both, I have business and I could be persuaded to have different business. The bookshops underneath become accomplices. Proprietors know that a person browsing for purchase might also be browsing for eyes. They stack scrolls like excuses and cultivate a memory for who lingers where. In the baths, acquaintance is arranged by temperature. The frigidarium rewards the quick smile. Cold water encourages brevity. In the tepidarium, warmth loosens a day's caution. Sentences lengthen and compliments grow mild fur. In the caldorium, steam turns faces into soft geometry, and everything said sounds a degree kinder. The circus, on race days, trains the city in synchronized enthusiasm. Lovers in training align their hearts by cheering for the same faction. The blues and greens look like sports teams and secretly double as compatibility tests. You can bond over a charioteer's ability to take the meta at impossible angles without admitting that you are making eye contact during hazardous turns. Homes contribute their own stage managers. At the door stands the Ianitor, the doorman named for Janus, the god of openings. He takes the measure of feet on the step the way a vintner reads a cup. His job is to decide if hope looks respectable today. He is a hinge with opinions. He recognizes the returning step of a client, the exploratory step of a neighbor, the new careful cadence of a suitor wearing softer solace. Inside, matrons and maids furnish that form of supervision which is almost conversation. They sit not quite between people and their sentences. They sit near sentences and smooth them like wrinkled linen. A young man finds that praise for the household's mosaic floors is welcomed and safer than praise of more portable beauty. A girl discovers the usefulness of asking about olives. This is not dishonesty. It is rehearsal. Most things in Rome are technically rehearsal. Across the alley, a balcony organizes the weather into rectangles. Curtains move at plausible intervals. The view, which used to be rooftops and storks, now includes the possibility of meeting someone while looking away. A threshold becomes a character in the evening's plot. It can be ally or wall, and it always knows which. Eventually, the city reminds people that life is both feelings and forms. Laws stand beside love and make lists. Patria potestas, the father's power, looms like a backdrop silent until consulted. Tutela, guardianship, bends over paperwork like a considerate tree, offering shade to signatures. Status knows how to sit in a chair and doesn't rise purely for affection. Citizenship has a seat of its own and a price list. It eats breakfast at a different hour. A senator's daughter cannot marry a random adventurous poet, at least not publicly, because Rome is allergic to surprises in the elite. Those who cannot legally marry invent a word for living as if they had. Cantobernium, sharing a roof. It is a tender compromise with tidy boundaries, warmed by habit and recognized by neighbors, which in Rome is almost the same thing as being blessed. Choice exists as long as you schedule it. Families, like reputable banks, prefer to be consulted before investments. They understand interest, inheritance, and how dowries philosophically resemble irrigation expensive, necessary. And best accounted for on wax dot, Augustus writes morality into law with the calm of a man, rearranging furniture that technically belongs to everyone. The Lex Aelia and Papia Papaya do the work of encouraging marriage and discouraging certain extracurriculars. Overnight, poems about other people's spouses become risky genre choices. What used to be two households whispering becomes a docket number. Courts are not romantic, but they are thorough. Witnesses demonstrate how closely Rome watches itself. Penalties appear with the briskness of clerks who pride themselves on legibility. Some unions hurry toward the altar to comply with the new climate and gain the tax advantages of being officially serious. Others decide that an orderly ending is cheaper than ungentle scrutiny. Reputations, delicate as glass and winteria, may be cracked by rumor and mended by time. Both craftspeople gossip and forgetting do steady business. Policy, which has little sense of humor, sits down where desert should be, and for a few years, people become very good at counting children and very bad at writing certain kinds of poetry. It all feels stern until you notice the city quietly adapting. It always does. Rome is a manufacturer of normal dot, while laws practice virtue in public, tokens practice conversation in miniature. A small scent flask, the undentarium, is a bouquet that forgot to be obvious. Leave it by a doorway and the room smells like a plan. Rings travel as punctuation. A twist of the band upon a finger can signal later, while the mouth politely says, "Now is not convenient." Wax tablets are the text messages of antiquity, with the consolation that a candle can eat your mistakes. A stylus scratches, stops, scratches again, and someone's day begins to tilt. Slaves who carry letters with perfect discretion have doctoral degrees in pretending coincidences are responsibilities. In a colonnade, 4 nods equal a sentence with adverbs. 5 is showing off. A borrowed scroll becomes a reason to return. If a person loans you Lucretius, that is philosophy. If they loan you Propertius, that is weather with intent. These rules are nowhere written and understood by everyone. Rome trains citizens in fluency without instruction. On certain streets, economy and affection share a ledger. Courtesans, meretresses, rate their hours using a scale elastic enough for mood and market. They operate like small businesses with excellent lighting. They keep ledgers that would impress a quester and relationships that confuse poets. The Lena the go-between who manages introductions, schedules, selective candor moves through this world with the agility of a person who has read all the footnotes. Stage comedies praise her wit and the court side her audacity, and both portraits are unusually fair. Gifts travel across these arrangements with a grammar of their own. A wreath signals festival and therefore plausible spontaneity. Doves offer portable myth. Pearls are accounted for twice, once in money and once in story. A dinner at a reputable tavern near the Forum says, "I will not pretend to be richer than I am." A private cook hired for the evening says, "I will pretend precisely," as long as it delights you. Favors accumulate interest at the rate of memory. Nothing is forgotten and very little is pressed. The safest compliment in Rome is moderation. It declares stability, and stability looks beautiful in a mortgage. The business of betrothal is beautifully dull. Sponsalia convert hope into clauses. Families assemble with professional eyebrows and choose witnesses who have a talent for nodding at the right time. A scribe straightens his posture and opens a clean wax tablet like a new morning. The dowry steps into the discussion politely but powerfully. It is property given to the husband, but aimed at the wife, like a river routed through another jurisdiction. Dowries may be money, land, furniture, or promising livestock, each inventoried with audible satisfaction. The language of these agreements has been polished by centuries of use. It glides like oil over warm bread. A date for the ceremony appears as if it were always waiting to be found. The engagement is sealed with gifts that know how to keep secrets, clothing that can be worn in public, jewelry that can vanish into a box, small statues of household gods who accept all parties and object to none. Weddings do not surprise. Rome. The city has rehearsed them for centuries and keeps the stage set. On the day, omens are checked with reasonable optimism. A friend shouts something cheerful as the bride is carried over the threshold, so her feet won't trip on the door's memory. She wears a flame-colored veil whose color is more philosophical than accurate, and a woolen girdle that knots like a promise. The bridegroom releases a small gift of coins at the hearth, and the household gods smile out of habit. The procession from old home to new turns the street into a minor festival. A flute believes itself necessary. Even the dogs refrain from controversy. Dinner is an edible choreographing of goodwill. And if the fish arrives intact, someone will say, "This is lucky." And everyone will agree because the fish has made an effort. Married life applies structure to tenderness, the way an aqueduct applies geometry to thirst. There are morning offerings to household gods, Lares and Penedes, who live on shelves, approve of sweeping and remember everything. There are daily bargains with time, her weaving versus his errands, the market versus the accounts, the adoption of a good bread recipe that multiplies gracefully. Some families are large and sound like rain upon a roof. Others are quiet and collect small virtues in bowls. In wealthier houses, a steward composes days like menus. In poorer ones, ingenuity performs miracles with cabbage. Even arguments are scheduled around practicality. "We can't discuss this while the lamps are smoking" is considered wisdom, not evasion. Children arrive with the complete confidence of new emperors and spend a year assuming that everyone is a province. Parents relearn the geography of sleep and teach the small humans the names of cups and stars. The city approves. It resists sentimentality while allowing tenderness to look like routine. Sometimes the laws, clean edges, return to the story. Divorce is a procedure, not a catastrophe. A formula tua's race tibi habeo, "I keep your things for you," does the work of a paragraph. The dowry begins its return journey like a caravan recognizing familiar hills. A marriage's furniture sorts itself with surprising lack of melodrama. Cups that used to belong to us become yours and mine, and none of the cups shatter from heartbreak. Rome does not consult crockery about ethics. Friends polish their neutrality and maintain two plausible loyalties. Clerks enjoy writing quickly. Occasionally, a lawsuit argues over the fine print, and everyone learns a new adjective. People remarry or don't, and the city's opinion hovers at room temperature. Grief is treated with the same courtesy granted to rain. It is noticed, accommodated, and expected to pass. The remains of love in Rome are charmingly durable. In Pompeii, on walls unwilling to be modest, names plus names equal declarations. Graffiti preserves the kind of sentences that parchment considers beneath it. So-and-so loves so-and-so. So-and-so stole my heart and possibly my cup. The innkeeper waters the wine. Rings sleep at the back of drawers like tame sons. Seals keep their owners' initials even when the owners have other lives. A wax tablet bears the faint impression of a phrase that was erased carefully, as if meaning could be softened enough to forget. In a cemetery outside the city walls, epitaphs negotiate between pride and longing. "She kept the hearth whole," says one. "He loved his friends and never owed anyone money," says another, which is practically poetry for Rome, the city's unromantic parts secretly serve romance. Census takers make lists which incidentally create history's love ledger. Aqueducts provide the water that becomes steam, that becomes conversation. Road engineers ensure that goodbyes include the suggestion of return, because the stones are honest and go both ways. Moneylenders keep people out of unflattering trouble, and sometimes, depending on rates, gently incite it. Market inspectors demand accurate weights, so that gifts mean what they mean and not what the scale wishes. Priests maintain calendars so that festivals arrive on time and lovers can pretend they planned it. Even the small superstitions have a practical tenderness. A woman tucks a phallic charm beneath the couch cushion because luck appreciates subtlety. A man avoids setting down his left shoe first because he is fond of predictability, not because Jupiter cares. A bride touches the threshold with her fingertips as if memorizing the grain of the wood will teach her the cadence of afternoons. A retired soldier writes a lead-cursed tablet and tosses it into the Tiber, politely requesting that arrival's hair fall out in clumps. The river receives the tablet the way it receives everything else, indifferently, efficiently, and on schedule. If you are still awake and no one is checking you, may enjoy a final handful of pocket facts to tuck under your sleep. There is evidence of love letters on papyrus from Egypt, written in a mixture of Greek and Latin, which is the long-distance relationship of languages. A marriage contract might specify the return of a dowry undamaged, including the silvered mirror, which suggests mirrors can be damaged by stories. Inscriptions record wives who sponsored gladiatorial games in honor of their husbands, demonstrating that matrimony, like Rome, can be both tender and loud. And in the crowd at the circus, statisticians of the soul discovered centuries ago what modern researchers say again. Interesting things happen when thousands of people look in the same direction and shout the same color. Night thickens. The stylus quiets on wax. In a portico, footsteps slow to the speed of listening. Lamps on balconies blink like well-trained constellations. A doorway breathes. The Ionitor considers the street and decides that nothing urgent remains. A small glass vial on a shelf leaks a little sweetness and turns a room into a memory in advance. Somewhere, under a fresco of Mercury, pretending not to eavesdrop, two people discuss bread with unusual concentration. Somewhere else, a divorce clerk places his pen straight on the table so that tomorrow will begin neatly. Rome rolls up its scroll of a day and ties it with a piece of string that once tied rosemary around a roast. It is practical in its romance and romantic in its practicality, and content to let both continue without hurry. If you drift now, the city will go on cataloging glances, filing gestures, renewing laws, assigning seats, weighing grapes, and scheduling festivals where strangers practice the art of becoming slightly less so. Love here is the slow sum of thresholds crossed with care. It is the whisper of sandals along stone, the shade of a porch where two shadows meet and pretend the meeting is about the weather, the warm opinion of a lamp confident that oil is enough. And as Rome curls deeper into its night, all this low, useful tenderness keeps ticking like a water clock with nowhere better to be.